Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Spinner, and I am happy to be talking with a return guest this week, Paul Semendinger. Usually we talk baseball, but this time we're going to be talking about Gettysburg. So your new book has just recently come out, is West Point at Gettysburg, Volume 1, and this is going to be A to G, and I'll let you explain that. So Paul, go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are.
Oh, thank you so much. I think this is my third time, and it's always a pleasure to be on this program and to talk with you. My name is Paul, and I've written a number of books, and my newest is called West Point at Gettysburg. This is volume 1 of 3. The book tells the history of every single graduate of West Point who found himself at the Battle of Gettysburg. And there are about 155 different West Point graduates who served or fought at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863. And the publisher, Sunbury Press, had decided that they're going to put this out in 3 volumes. So volume 1 is A through G.
And this is such an interesting approach to talking about Gettysburg and what happened. And I've read it, so I read your note about where all this came from. But tell our listeners a little bit about how you got interested in this subject and why you wanted to approach it from this perspective.
Oh, wonderful question. You know the answer. It's a long answer. I think the introduction's about 100 pages. I'm exaggerating, of course. But I was a history teacher. I'll give you the short version. I've always had an affinity for history. When I was in college, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I had a trip to Gettysburg. I was just mesmerized and fascinated by the battlefield and everything that happened there and all the monuments and the signs. And I said, someday I need to really figure out what this is all about, what actually took place here. I've read a million different books about Gettysburg. I also took my sons when they were Boy Scouts. I'm proud to say they all made Eagle on a couple trips, but I took the Boy Scouts on trips to Gettysburg. And as I was giving the tour, I made up my own 3-day tour, each day representing a different day in the battle. It was a 3-day battle. I find myself saying, well, this guy who was at this point was a graduate of West Point. Oh, and this guy was a graduate of West Point. And you're seeing guys who are from the North, the Union, who were from West Point. And you see guys from the South, the Confederacy, who were from West Point. And I thought the very beginnings of the book started to percolate and formulate probably about 10 or 12 years before I even started writing the book. I needed to wait until I retired because the research process for something like this, digging up the histories of guys who fought in a battle in 1863, is time-consuming and labor-intensive. It's great and it's fun and it's wonderful, but it just takes me a long time.
Oh, yeah, I can't imagine. I kind of avoid any sort of historical fiction in my own writings. I'm like, I do not have time to make that an accurate representation at this point in my life. So, yeah,
100%.
I am imagining you really probably had to dig through quite a bit of sources. And some, it seemed like you were able to find quite a bit of information for some of the people you profile, and then others were a bit shorter. Where did you have to go for some of this research, and what was that process like?
The process involved many steps. The first step involved going to the battlefield again, letting them know at the battlefield that I was an author, and making arrangements to go into their archives, into their histories. And I found that when you reach out to places and tell them that you want to do research, they are always extremely accommodating. And so the people at Gettysburg, John Hoptak, who really runs that whole research division, these people are just so welcoming and kind. And they welcomed me in, shared all of their information with me. And it was there that I started to do the research and find out which guys had graduated from West Point and had served at Gettysburg. And then I would ask, what information do you have about each of the guys? And they don't have information about each of those people in detail. And then that brought my search to the internet. And there was a man named Cullum, and he has this thing called Cullum's Register, and he tells in very brief, in bullet form, if you will, but they're not really bullets because it was written in the 1860s. Actually, he started this during the 1800s and continued it for decades. But little tiny briefs about the places these guys had been. He recounts the history of every single West Point graduate and where they went. And so that gave me a good place to go. And of course, then I have an extensive volumes of Civil War books, many dealing specifically with the Battle of Gettysburg, and I used all that kind of information. And then the other place I've been very fortunate to find, something that we didn't have when like we were in college. If you wanted to see old newspapers, you had to go to libraries and look it up on microfilm or microfiche. But there's a great site that's newspapers.com. And if you figure out when a guy died or when he got a promotion or if he did something special, and you try to find newspapers from that area of the country at that specific time period, you can usually dig up and find some other good information.
It's really a pretty wide range of sources. I was curious, record keeping over the years sometimes hasn't been amazing. And even more recently, like my dad was in the military most of his adult life, and a whole chunk of his military records are gone because of a fire at some place that
Yes.
they were stored. And so I was curious as I was reading, I was like, man, how did you find all of this stuff? Because I imagine there were periods of that were not well documented or may have been lost, or who knows, and what you're relying on. So that's really
Correct.
fascinating to see how many different places actually did have records that you had to hunt for, but they were actually there.
Correct. And again, you're right that floods, fires, municipal buildings being moved, and papers being thrown away over that period of time, there is a lot of information that obviously has been lost. When you search these different soldiers' names as well, some of them have extensive family histories, and you can find some information there. Now, what I always try to do is fact check any information I have. So if you get a piece of information, I always try to make sure I can find somebody else that at least said the same thing, or at least can confirm it. You can't do that all the time, but it does work. And I just remembered one other source I used, which I put into as many of the biographies as possible. Since all of these gentlemen were officers, at the end of the battle, they were supposed to write, because they commanded people, a battlefield report after the battle, an action report. And all of those, the ones that have survived, which I think it's pretty extensive. I bet you it's most of the ones that were written, have been published online. And you just can dig through those archives as well and read what they wrote about the battle. And that gives just at least some information about what they did at Gettysburg. Because as you know, I didn't just talk about what they did at Gettysburg. I talked about where they came from, what happened during the battle, and what happened after the battle in their lives.
Well, and that kind of leads me to another question that I wanted to ask you about, because you'd mentioned some of the personal narratives, and a lot of, I mean, even still, those reports that soldiers write, it's ideally as fact-based as possible, but there's also, some personal perceptions, and maybe at times like how you want something to come off after the fact. So there's always kind of that little bit of room for personal interpretation or opinion or feeling that might end up in some of those reports. And so I was curious, like, did you encounter some of those issues of like, oh, he wrote it out this way, but someone over here kind of had a slightly different version of how things went?
Yes. Oh, and that happens a lot when you're studying history. Of course, I think you make a great point. When you're writing the story of what happened at the battle or whatever, but in this case at the battle, most likely you're going to glorify the role that you played. There are a host of different people in the history of the Battle of Gettysburg that claim that it was their actions that saved the day and won the battle. I mean, a lot of people claim those things. And if not for my quick thinking at this moment and X, Y, or Z, the battle may have been lost. But thank goodness for me. But again, then we also have a lot of historians. The Battle of Gettysburg has been documented in many, many, many legitimate sources. And again, there's also all those signs and monuments at Gettysburg that tell the story. At least they tell the story as Gettysburg wants it told. So we cross-reference against those as well. And you try to ascertain the truth. Most of them, what they wrote was pretty accurate to what the historians and other books and other sources have agreed upon. But it's, again, as you noted, not necessarily 100%.
It was something that kind of caught my mind because the revision of history was a theme that came up with my students in our last quarter. We'd read Animal Farm in semester one, and then we read a book called A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which on the surface looks like a fun, cute story about giant gingerbread men and a little wizard, but it actually has a lot of like really deep themes, and part of that was that idea of like a revisionist fallacy. And I had posed the questions to my students like, what's the problem with Victor's writing history? And they're like, they hadn't really thought about it. And I'm like, who writes history? And they're like, historians. Well, okay, but which historians? Took them a while to get to the point of like, if you win the battle and you write the history, you're writing it from a certain perspective, and that can influence how you tell the story. And they're like, oh, okay, so like bias and things like that. So one of the things that I liked about your approach to this was it wasn't just the victorious West Point graduates or the ones who did the most interesting things. It was all of them, as you mentioned, from the Union, from the South. It was a pretty wide-ranging perspective of what all of these graduates from this one place, they all came from this one place, but they played so many different roles. And I really thought that that helped give a nice, complete, broad perspective of a lot of what happened. Because it wasn't something like, I know about Gettysburg, but I didn't know a lot of like the intricate details. So I really appreciated that you had such a comprehensive look at it from all the soldiers' perspectives.
Well, thank you. That's what I tried to do because each of them has a story to tell, and each of their stories were important. We know the major players like Robert E. Lee, and obviously he's the biggest, he's the most famous, but also from the Confederates, General Longstreet. Those both begin with L, though, so they're not in this book, but they'll be in volume 2. But I like how you say that, the history gets written. The South had basically won. That army, the Army of Northern Virginia that was run by Robert E. Lee, had basically won every battle that they had fought in up to that point, except probably the Battle of Antietam. But from the beginning of the war, and the war started like 2 years before, right up to that point, the South just kept winning and winning and winning. And the Union Army, the Army of the Potomac, actually kept changing their generals over and over and over again because they couldn't find anybody who could beat Robert E. Lee. And Robert E. Lee obviously loses the Battle of Gettysburg. What then happens is his army retreats south and the war rages for 2 more long years. General Grant comes to the east, and that's when he and Lee fight all the way down through Virginia. But since this was Robert E. Lee's first big loss, those Southerners that never wanted anything bad about Robert E. Lee, the whole idea of the lost cause comes about, like, why did we lose the battle? And some of those players at Gettysburg, like General Longstreet, are given the blame because it couldn't have been Robert E. Lee's fault. So they blame Longstreet, they blame Jeb Stuart, they blame others for various reasons why the South wasn't able to defeat the North at that battle.
I love that you bring that up because it's something that I think is really relevant today, looking at current conflicts and history, that how something is told really makes a big difference. And like I said, it was something with my students that stuck out to me, that it was me as their teacher trying to get them to think a little bit more critically about what we're reading and just what's going on in the world. But I think that's something like we do as people, just on an everyday basis too. When we're telling a story to a friend or a family member, we have those inclinations to protect ourselves or someone we care about and, tell things in a certain way to either make it look better or worse than what happens. It is just kind of a natural human instinct to do that. But it's
100%.
so important with history and with books like this that we're not relying on just, I guess, like a goal-oriented way of telling a story of like, I want to show this or that or the other or make this person into a hero or not, but just like sharing the facts and the details and doing that over a broader perspective than just, one person. Because I imagine at the time, if something like this had been written, it would have looked very different than what you ended up writing and probably would have had a different tone and type of content to it.
Probably. That's a great point, because one of the things, all you have to do is look at various blogs or websites or podcasts today for people who advocate for whichever political point of view, and it's going to be whatever person X did is bad no matter what, and the other side will say whatever person X did is good, or like people dig their heels into whatever story they're trying to tell, whatever perspective they're trying to promote. But with history, something like the Battle of Gettysburg happened so long ago that those personal inclinations go away. It's more you can look at it and say, yeah, basically over the period of history, you say, like, this is probably, though somebody asked me at a presentation the other day, how do they know that those people were exactly at that point doing exactly that? And I don't know if we ever know 100%, but we're pretty sure that what we're reporting on and recording or writing about all these years later has stood the test of time and has gotten away from that recency bias that clouds the way we look at things that are happening in our world today.
That's a great point. I can't remember what, it was some podcast I was listening to, and they were talking about someone who had submitted a memoir to them. And part of their pitch was that this memoir was their process of working through their grief and the things that they had dealt with. And the agent was immediately like, oh, no, no, no. It's like, if you're still in the stage of like working through and processing, like, this is not ready. This is still like a personal project. And it just struck me as kind of funny, because it was like, yeah, I think writing is a wonderful way to process out emotion, but that distance really is what turns it into something more shareable and more relatable to other people. And I like what you said about the details that you included, standing the test of time and trying to, if you read one thing here, trying to confirm it somewhere else. I think that is something, again, as people, we don't do that very often. We tend to just, see something and believe it and run with it. Man, trying to teach my students about like reliable resources and, fact checking and credibility and all of that. I wish you lived closer. You could come give a presentation to my students. We're about to start studying sources and research.
The next time you're in New Mexico, right? The next time I'm in New Mexico, I'll come to your. Yeah. Not that I've ever been there. I was there once in 1982, but the next time I'm there, I will come to your class.
We will plan it, because I love the amount of research and work you put in to making sure that this was accurate and credible. I was wondering, did you find out anything surprising that you didn't know before as you were digging into all of this?
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, the program here is only 30 minutes, because we could talk for about 30 hours now about the surprises I found. There's so many. The beginning of what I'm going to tell you wasn't a surprise when I wrote the book. It was a surprise when I first found it out. If you take a tour of the battlefield today, much of it is preserved, the area, the land, and it's the most decorated battlefield. There's, as I mentioned before, there are monuments and markers. I don't want to use the word litter, because they add a certain sense of awe to the battlefield, but they're everywhere. If you go there, there's monuments and things everywhere you look. And the first time we went there, as we were driving through one area, I saw a statue, a larger-than-life statue of a general. And I looked at the general and saw his name, and I went, I can't believe that guy was here. I'm in shock. It doesn't make any sense, because it was so out of the ordinary. That guy's name was Abner Doubleday. He has a big statue on the battlefield. Now, he is credited, of course, with inventing baseball, which he did not do. And one of the people I was excited to read about and learn about as I did the research in this was Abner Doubleday, some of the facts about his life. And one of the things I learned was he commanded troops on all 3 days and played a significant role in some of the major actions on all 3 days. And the way the battle unfolds, that didn't really happen. Usually there was a group of guys who were involved in the battle at a specific area on that day, and then it's other troops and other leaders. Most of the generals didn't necessarily play a major part in each of the 3 days, especially on the Union side, but he did. He also, because of conflict, which it's too detailed to get into here, but on the first day, he commanded the 1st Corps. Corps is the biggest unit you would have within your army, and was then demoted after the first day, and he commanded smaller groups of armies on the 2nd and 3rd days. And then after the battle, because he lost his corps and was basically demoted, he went back to Washington and was involved more in other things back in Washington rather than on battlefields. And when Abraham Lincoln decides, after he's invited in November of 1863, the battle was in July, to go say a few words to dedicate the battlefield, which becomes his Gettysburg Address, he invites Abner Doubleday to go with him. And so he's one of only two men who fought at the battle and was also present when Abraham Lincoln delivered the Gettysburg Address. So that kind of stuff is just fascinating.
I wouldn't have considered those connections like that. And you think a lot of the people that you profile in this first part of the book, quite a few of them stayed in the military and that was kind of their career path. And then you had others who went on to do other things completely unconnected. It kind of struck me as funny because you think like this is such a big moment in American history that would be like the defining thing, that the people who were there, like that's the thing of their life that they did. But actually a lot of them, went on and did plenty of other stuff afterward.
Yes, yeah, a lot of them. Many of them wrote books. They got involved. He's not in this book. He's in the next book. Oliver Howard. Howard University is named after him because he wants to give freed black men the chance to have a place of higher education. So Howard University, Robert E. Lee, again, he's not quite in this book yet, but he then becomes the president of a college. Like, as I say, many of them wrote books. They did surveys. They were involved as engineers. George Sears Green, who's in this book, was the person who built the Croton Aqueduct, which brought water to New York and helped with the formation of Central Park. I mean, the stories go on, and each of them is more fascinating than the next one. These were really special human beings who impacted the world around them in so many ways, not just on a battlefield.
Well, I find it interesting how many people tend to be, like, if they're involved in one big interesting thing, they are involved in other big interesting things too. Like, I don't know if it's a personality trait or a work ethic or just you're there at the right time when a lot of stuff is going on. This was something that, like, with my grandpa, as I got older and wanted to learn more about who he was before he died, and because he always loved to tell stories, and as a kid, I didn't know if half of them were true or not. Grandpas, they like to tell stories. But it was interesting to hear all of the things that he was involved with. And it was just like, how did you participate in all of those things in one life? And it just seems like that tends to happen. Like a lot of people who, whether it's they're in the places where things are happening or they're just the type of person who gets involved and does things, that seems to be a pattern throughout history of just people who stay involved and their name keeps coming up in various places throughout their lives. It can be really fascinating to kind of take a person and track all the things that they've been involved in. It's surprising, even with just regular everyday people, to see what, if you're willing to, stand up and get involved and participate, there's a lot of interesting, worthwhile things that go on in the world that people can be a part of.
100%. What's that saying? If you need something done, give it to a busy person, because a busy person will still find a way to get it done. People who want to get involved in things find the time. People who are leaders find opportunities to lead. People who are leaders attract the attention of people who need leaders. These were all special people. They all went to West Point. You had to be appointed to even be able to attend West Point. I mean, in order to get into that place, they were arguably the highest achievers in their neck of the woods. When you're put in an environment with other high achievers, you tend to motivate each other. And so they all pushed each other to rise up and to do good things. So I think you make a great point that these gentlemen were all more than just soldiers. Those who survived, many of them went on to do other great things, whether it be in the military or in public life or private sector once they were civilians again.
That is something coming away from reading this first volume that I was really impressed by, of just seeing that this didn't stop, that they continued to go on and either, like you said, be leaders or do interesting things that helped other people. I was really impressed with how much people accomplished after and seeing where they took that. Those who survived, most of them really went on to continue to accomplish. You've done this research on the whole group of people. What you've taken away from all all of this research and learning about these really fascinating, incredible people?
That's a great question. What did I take away is, I wrote once a long time ago in a different book that when I hear stories of people who succeed, it motivates me to want to succeed even more and to do even more things in my life and to achieve tasks that I probably never thought I could, including writing books. Before we write books, people tell us, what do you know about writing? How could you ever write a book? And then you write a book and then they're like, well, that's about baseball. That's easy for you. But you could never write a book about the Civil War. Well, I just did. Right? The other thing it inspires me to do is continue researching and continue writing because I still have to write volumes 2 and 3. Those have to come out. And then as I do these projects, it spurs other ideas. The process of learning inspires me to learn more because you don't just learn about the one person. Here's a silly thing. There's a guy named DeLancey Floyd Jones who's in there. And after the war, he donates a plot of his land for what I think was the first public library in the state of New York. If not, it was definitely the first library in his area. And that library still stands. And I'm going to get a chance to visit that place next October. I'm going to get a tour of the library, the cemetery where he lies. I'm going to give a speech. They're going to have a whole big historical day planned. It should be pretty neat. And DeLancey Floyd Jones was related to James Fenimore Cooper, Elizabeth Wharton, Alexander Hamilton, but he was also related to this guy named John McAdam. I didn't even notice that when I was writing the book. I just skipped over it because I didn't know who John McAdam was. And when I saw it a couple of weeks ago, I said, John McAdam, who is that guy? And it turns out that this is the guy that macadam, the pavement where kids play on behind the school or whatever, macadam was invented by this guy. Each time you read these stories, you learn a little bit more and you go, that's fascinating. And then you jump into these rabbit holes and you find more and more stories of things that have names and people who did things. And again, that just inspires me to keep writing and to keep researching and to keep telling more great stories.
That is so true. That made me think, and I can't remember the name of anybody who was involved in this story, and I apologize if I get some details wrong, but there was the story of a woman who had written an author saying that she enjoyed his book and she wished she could do something similar, but she had no skill whatsoever. And he'd asked her a very simple question about where she worked and asked her to describe it. And she ended up looking at the bricks that she was sitting on and having to research, where did that brick come from? How was it made? What is the process? And they kept writing back and forth. And he ended up helping her take everything that she had researched about brick and turn it into a scholarly article. And she had no qualifications to do this. She just went through on her own time and research. And then he submitted it kind of vouching for her and then let her know and sent her a check that she got paid for writing it. And he followed it up with another question. What's under the brick?
Oh, that's great.
And so I think of that story where it's like the simplest thing can really be inspirational once you start digging into it. And I love that that was something that was inspirational for you, of finding even, a name that you passed over a couple times and then be like, oh my gosh, that really is something pretty interesting.
It's fun. That's part of the joy of doing the work. It's labor intensive. It's researching isn't always glamorous and fun. Like locking yourself in a room for 7 hours to say, all right, I've got to figure out the story about this guy. And other people, especially, in spring when the weather starts to get nice and you hear the birds outside and the sun is coming up and you've been cooped up all winter. There are certain days you don't really want to be inside. You want to be outside and doing things. And you're like, nope, today I got to find out about this guy no one else has ever heard of and tell his life story. So it's not all glamorous, but as you get into the process, it always finds a way to bring some type of joy.
We have barely scratched the surface of everything that you get into in this book. And there's 2 more to come in the series, but we are out of time already.
It goes too quickly.
It does. So before we wrap up, I wanted to remind our listeners that the book is called West Point at Gettysburg, Volume 1, A to G, by Paul Semendinger. And Paul, where can people find you and the book online?
It should be available everywhere. I also have my own site, Dr. Paul Sem, DrPaulSem.com. I have all of my public appearances in order on that page.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I had a lot of fun talking to you, and I learned a lot from the book as well.
Thank you. I always have fun talking with you as well. This was a great pleasure.